Hey guys, how you doing? This is False Bulls 123 and this is day 65 of our daily quarantine challenge. I certainly hope that's the right number. So, at the beginning of each week, I've been trying to just do a weekly reading vlog. I just want to have some fun with it while we're doing the quarantine, and I do want to mention this is not going to be something I'm going to be doing after this. After the quarantine, I really want to practice my social distancing as much as possible, just because I don't want to have a relapse of this. I don't want us to come back and have everyone else dead just like the Spanish flu. Side note, interestingly enough, I actually have had 3 relatives who passed away during the Spanish flu. And so, if that hadn't happened, I might have had more cousins. I already have too many, but I might have had more, so whatever. Getting onto the actual fucking subject of this video, because I can never shut the fuck up, what did I read this week, Ryan? Or last week, or whenever the fuck ever this video is about? I pretty much, I'm reading 2 novels right now, and I finished one novel last week because I was a good boy. So let's get on the one I've actually finished. That would be Freshwater, and I don't know how to pronounce their name, so I'm just going to put, it over here. You can read it with your eyes, and I do apologize for not being able to pronounce their name. I feel like a piece of shit for that, but I'm going to move on. What's Freshwater about, Ryan? We don't know these things, and you apparently do. Well, Freshwater is essentially a debut novel about the author. Sorry. It's a debut novel by the author, and it essentially follows the story of a person named Ada. And I say person because later in the story it is revealed that they're gender fluid or non-binary or some similarity or accumulation thereof. And I will get into why it isn't so set in stone, even though a lot of people consider gender to be fluid and that similar type of thing. So pretty much it follows the story of Ada, who essentially has one foot in the grave, which is a direct quote. And that basically in her culture, their culture, they essentially have the spirits, which I cannot pronounce because I do not speak Igbo. But essentially there are these malevolent spirits, kind of, from the description I've read from the mythology, they're a little similar to changelings in the sense. Essentially the spirits are supposed to be born to the same parents over and over again and cause their downfall. And so it's expected for the children to be burned and die and then be born again and then die. And this is just sort of wrecks them emotionally and financially and physically. And I'm just that is a zesty mythology. But essentially, they survive. And so they grow up, and it's essentially... The book is essentially about a person with multiple personality disorder or dissociative identity disorder. I'm not sure what would be the correct term. Through the look of sort of the Igbo culture. And so it's sort of a culture-bound interpretation of this mental state, which I found to be super freaking fascinating. So there's a lot of stories... So there's a lot of the book written in the collective we, which I thought was really interesting. There was a lot of poesis, just very poetic speech, a lot of surrealism because it's taken from... A lot of the story is told from this very abstract, disassociated perspective, where this person is talking about a person while also being that person. And so it's really interesting from a perspective viewpoint. Other things I really liked in the discussion was just talking about culture. Ada talked about her own culture. She talked about moving to America and how all of that. There's a lot of focus on spirituality and religion, which I like. Near the end of the book, they talked a lot about spirituality, about the mythology and the cosmology, and how their spirits infected that. And there's also discussion of, a few other religions as well. Ada was raised Catholic, and so they definitely had, some crisis with faith, and so a lot of the book was not only separating from these very strong, puritanical views of sexuality and sex and all of that other stuff through their Catholic upbringing, they also had, find forgiveness in themselves due to a really traumatic event that happened to them early on in the story. And while it's much more abstracted and distanced from the event itself, you can definitely see how the event actually affects the character throughout the story, or I don't want to say characters because it's one person, but there's 3 separate viewpoints and personalities. And so, we'll get on to that. Trigger warnings, if you are going to read this book, there is a lot of dog shit happens, and I'm just going to mention some of it. Let's see, sexual assault, eating disorders, self-harm. I'm sure if I really thought about the book a bit more, I could probably find a few more trigger warnings. But basically, bad shit happens to the characters, it's very traumatic, and if you don't want to experience that trauma, please be advised that these things happen in the book. Anyway, moving on. Let's see, another really interesting thought, besides just the whole view on Catholicism as it ties into their own spirituality, I thought was really interesting, was that one of her friends and one of their friends is sort of this confidant, and they actually practice an Afro-Caribbean religion. I don't know which one. I don't believe it's ever specifically mentioned. I don't know if it's Hoodoo or Santeria or like a bunch of the other religions that are similar but different, because I don't live in like the south east of America, so I'm not like, exposed to any of those religions. I don't know anyone who practices them. And so I'm not at all knowledgeable about the differences in kind. But essentially her friend Marianne, or I can't remember her name exactly, discusses her saints, about other aspects of the religion. And I think that was really interesting because it provides sort of a counterpoint that really has a similar mythology and understanding based off of her 2 different fonts of faith. And so I think it's really interesting because her friend actually really accepts her mental state as just sort of a spiritual or religious experience, which I thought was really fascinating. Let's see, other thing that I did really well was just a discussion of gender identity, because the main character, and you might notice that I've been tripling up on the pronouns a little bit, I do apologize about that, is gender fluid or non-binary, and because of their multiple personalities, it's a little hard to exactly pin a label on it. A lot of people might mention, definitely in the comments, and please feel to put your perspectives down below, because, like I said, cishet might be not the perfect guy to speak about this, but, I don't think that anyone's demographics should ban them from looking at other people's cultures or perspectives or trying to understand another person's, viewpoint. Because I think that the more we try to be empathetic and put ourselves in other people's shoes, the better we can understand and be a more empathetic person. Anyway, a lot of people mention that non-binary doesn't refer to any specific solid gender, but can actually refer to an entire umbrella of terms that are outside of the gender binary, which I think is a really interesting point. That's where you get different cultural views of gender, like two souls, or I can't think of any other ones off the top of my head, but if you are from those cultures, mention those below, talk about your experiences or whatever the heck you want. And so yeah, so non-binary isn't a exact term, it's more of an umbrella, which is at least my understanding of it. I think that it was really interesting because while some of her personalities like Ada and I can't remember how to pronounce the other one's name, but essentially there's one character, Ada, and then there's another personality who's more this sex-pod, aggressive character. They're kind of like this protective shell that just really helps her deal with her trauma while dealing with sexual situations. It's a bit like her id almost. This very carnal, very ravenous personality that just wants what it wants and is very hedonistic. Then there is also Saint Vincent, which is almost an allegory for, I guess, dysphoria or for her sort of male side of things. And so Saint Vincent is very explicitly male, while the other two characters are female in different, representations of femininity, which I think is really interesting. And so they actually, discuss, Ada discusses, or I'm going to say they just because it is collective. They all have these different thoughts. And so the perspective is the same person, but it changes from, which personality is surfacing in the chapter, which I think is a really interesting concept. And so, essentially, they discuss, the gender identity and the gender expression and a lot of these other things that they've had to deal with in their life because of their psychological state and all these other things. And so I think it's really interesting because on one hand, like, they do discuss, like, mental health and mental illness. But on the other hand, there's also this acceptance of who they are through their cultural and spiritual, like, ideas. And I think that is just really, really fascinating. I was a little bit anxious about reading this book just because I'm always afraid that when I read a book that has this cultural impact, that has this diverse viewpoint, that I may not like it. And I feel that sometimes in this whole, like, cancel culture that we have these days, that people might judge somebody disliking a book for its style or for its writing as a criticism or condemnation of a culture that it is representing. And I think that can be very, very distasteful. Mostly, I'm just afraid of when I read books, it's like, I might not like them. And I don't try to read books because they are culturally profound or because they have a diverse audience. Well, I do like to read books that have diversity in them, but I don't read a book simply because it has diversity. And mostly, I think, like, I'm not going to get too into it because I feel that identity politics is a touchy subject, and I don't feel like I can articulate my ideas well enough to really make myself understood. And I think that's perfectly okay. So I'm going to move on and talk about, like, the two other books I am reading currently. So I guess I'm just going to do this from read to least read and then give you a little bonus reading that I did yesterday, and we'll talk about that. So next up, I have been reading Have You Seen Me? And I think it's by Amy White. I don't know, like, the author's name is going to be there. Apparently, I don't remember the name of authors that I read, so fuck me, I guess. Have You Seen Me is a thriller, and I'm thinking, because I was in the mood for a thriller lately. I've been reading, like, some softer stuff, and I'm just like, let's go hard again. I think my next pick is probably going to be nonfiction, just because I've been reading a lot more than I'm used to, and so I'm trying to diversify my genre just to keep myself entertained, And so Have You Seen Me is basically this woman. I'm honestly trying to remember her name off the top of my head, and I should know her considering that I literally listened to the book for 3 hours today. It's an audiobook, if you guys care. I mean, there's also a print edition, because most books are, but you know what I mean. Essentially, it is about, so this woman walked into, like, her office one day, and she can't find her key, she can't find her key card, she can't find, like, any of this shit. And then she realizes, wait a second, this isn't my office. I can't remember the last 5 years of my life. I have amnesia. And I'm just like, oh, woo? And so you basically learn that this woman has gone through what's called a dissociative fugue state, which I think, like, everyone's, like, sort of heard of, like, what a fugue state is, even though apparently that's not the kosher way to say it, but what the fuck ever. And so she's essentially dealing with all this lost time, trying to figure out, like, sorry, my cat over there is just, like, playing on a bunch of debris because she's a little piece of shit. But I love her anyway, even though she is a giant bitch. Anyway, now that I've slut-shamed my cat, pretty much, so she's dealing with, like, this lost time. She's trying to, like, figure out, like, where was I? Like, did I murder a dude? Did I, like, suck a D? I don't know. I don't remember anything. And at the same time, she's resurfacing these memories from this traumatic experience where she found this dead body when she was a kid. And so, like, there's a lot of questions being brought up. Like, are the two cases related? Where was she during that time? Or any of this other, like, fucking drama in her life related to, like, her having this dissociative break. Because the main thing about it was that the state is caused by an extreme emotional trauma. And so she's like, yeah, I had a fight about, like, with my husband, because he's like, yo, let me put a baby in you. And she was like, I don't want no baby in me. But she's like, did that cause me to go, like, just forget where I was for, like, 4 days? Or was it something more important? So, I'm enjoying it. Hello, Gizzy. I love you, too. Say hello to the camera, you giant freaking... Okay. Apparently she needs love while I film to you, so here is my cat. Bite me, cat. Bite me hard, you big girl. Anyway. And, yeah, I see you looking at me. I'm talking to the camera. Anyway, guys, how you doing? Hey. So pretty much, she's like just trying to deal with like all of that shit. I think it's decent. If I'm going to give this like, a tentative rating, I'm probably going to give it about 3 stars. It's thriller enough, like, it's keeping me entertained, but at the same time, like, it's not too, like, shocking or scandalous. I'm usually can see, like, some of, like, the beats coming, and so it's like, it's not really, like, getting me on the edge of my seat, but I'm enjoying the story as it's unfolding for the most part. I'm about 75% of the way through the book, and they really haven't connected that much yet, and so I'm like, okay, whatever. And so we're mostly just dealing with, like, her worrying about that, but also, like, with a lot of other drama in her life. Because she's, like, dealing with, like, all of this, like, professional drama, and she's dealing with, like, all of this, like, marital drama, and she's dealing with, like, all of this family drama. And I'm just like, okay, whatever. It, like, it's a good characterization. The characters are all realistic. They're relatively fleshed out, even though you don't get too much of like side characters' motivations. They're just like, this is what I do with their life. This is what they're like. This one chick is kind of a bitch, but maybe I'm too hard on her. And so you're like, okay, whatever, this stuff is happening. Only small criticism I have of the character is that she worries about everything. She is a fretful Betty. And it's like, I get it, honey. Like, you just went through this, like, really intense medical scare. You're having some issues, but it's like, can you just stop worrying? Like, can you maybe go, like, 5 minutes without having a mental breakdown because your husband threw a vase in the trash? Like, literally. There's an entire chapter where she can't find some roses, and then she finds them in the trash can, and she's like, oh my goodness, I completely forgot. I must have had, like, a missing time, and I'm going to just, like, be a crazy, like, basket case for the rest of my life. And I'm thinking, honey, maybe your husband threw those away. You're not the only person that lives in this apartment. And like, the next chapter, and I'm sorry, like, this isn't really a spoiler, because it's just, like, the most pedestrian plot point. Oh, that's some good alliteration. Her husband is just like, yeah, honey, I threw those away. They were annoying me. And I'm just like, that sounds like something a dude would do. And she's just like, but what? That doesn't sound like him. That sounds suspicious. And then, like, there's this other point where she's just like, is my husband secretly a whore? Maybe he's fucking a blonde bitch. And she's just like, yeah, that's right. He's probably cheating on me because I can't find his pants in the hamper. And I'm thinking, first of all, that is super hypocritical considering that you have been, like, hanging way too much around your ex lately. And second, honey, where are you getting this from? Like, why are you just because, like, your husband's been busy at work, you think suddenly he's cheating on you? Like, come on, girl. Come on. Maybe deal with, like, the interesting shit in your life instead of just fretting about, like, every bit and piece that's happening. And it's like, if I wanted to read about an A-list personality person worrying about shit, I would just read my diary. And I don't want to do that because that shit's sad. So it's like, come on. Other than that, it's not a bad thriller. Like, it has some interesting premises, and I like the story because I like the idea of missing time and amnesia plots. So there's a fly in my face. But it's just, it could definitely pick up some. The pace is a bit plotting, but, like, she makes sure to have, like, those little zesty tidbits in with the characters. And out of the drama front, it's doing pretty well, because there is a dramatic aspect in the book. Next up, I'm reading The Martian by Andy Weir. Wow, I can actually remember a fucking author in this video. Imagine that. And I'm actually really enjoying it. I'm about a third of the way through. I haven't really just had a chance to be doing that much physical reading, or maybe I've just been feeling lazy, so I haven't been doing it, whatever, but I'm liking it. Like I said, I'm about 35% through, about a third of the way, and I am loving it so far. It is great. So, a lot of things I like is, main character, really great voice. He has a great sense of humor. He's very intelligent, which I enjoy. As sci-fi goes, it's very technical, which is the type of sci-fi I enjoy. Because, yeah, I like the sort of sci-fi where it's more sociological, where it's more sort of imaginative, more speculative. That's what I'm looking for. Like, I like Asimov, I like, stuff like that, where it's just like, yeah, this is just like some weird fucking shit that's happening. And you're like, okay, because I like sci-fi like that. But I also really love technical sci-fi, where they're talking about, like, sort of this near future stuff where, like, this things to totally happen, and they give you stats on things, and they're just like, okay, this is the math that I did. And I'm not the biggest person when it's just like, oh, here's a bunch of boring math, because, like, yeah, I'll tune out for that. But if you write it the right way, and you make it interesting, like, how this works and how you're trying to survive, I can enjoy that so much. Where it kind of reminds me a little bit of Crichton, just because you have that very technical, very matter-of-fact description where you get really nitty-gritty into the details. And so I've really been enjoying that sort of aspect. But there's also just, like, a lot of personality from the main character. I realized that even though this book was very popular and it was made into a major motion picture movie, is that redundant to say major motion picture movie? Fucking no. But what is The Martian about, Ryan, you dumb bitch? Well, The Martian is essentially about this guy, whose name I cannot remember because I'm bad at remembering characters' names apparently. And he essentially gets stuck on Mars. Because he went down there, like, did like, blah, blah, blah. Basically, he was on a astronomical trip. I don't even know what to call it. He was basically on a space mission, that's the one I'm looking for, to basically spend some time on Mars, like, do some, like, Mars landing. And the rest of his team has to, like, emergency evacuate because of a sandstorm. But he basically goes AWOL during the evacuation and everyone thinks he's dead. But he wakes up, he's like, wait a second, I'm not dead. And so it's basically him trying to survive on Mars, which is super freaking cool. And, oh, it's fantastic. Right now in the story, he's basically just made communication with with Earth. And so they're trying to, like, figure shit out. And it is just absolutely fantastic. I'm really enjoying the story. I definitely want to get more, like, finish it this week. Just because I want to keep my momentum going. But at the same time, I'm really enjoying the story. So I'm going to try my best to do some reading today. Even though I have a lot of stuff. I have slotted because it's my, like, one day off. And I tend to slack for the rest of the week. But whatever the fuck ever. And let's move on, because this video is going to be a little bit long, into the last thing I read. So, I really love short form writing. It just is a love of mine. I like short stories, I like creepypastas, and so I was doing some short form reading with my mother last night. So she listens to mostly audiobooks just because of her disability, she doesn't really have a lot of ease holding actual books, and she doesn't really feel like, using ebooks to swipe it, which I can feel. Like, that is a lot of tactile movement for someone who really doesn't have the best mobility in their arms. So she listens to mostly audiobooks, but I like to read to her as well. It's just something that I like to do, and I like the circular nature of it, because, like, she used to read to me as a kid, so, like, I like to read to her now that she doesn't always have the ease of access. And so I actually read her last night. It was called the Lickety Split series. It was written by Mac Vorniak. Hopefully I pronounced your name correctly, Mac. And he is a Redditor who is writing short-form creepypastas. Well, that is redundant. Who's writing creepypastas on Reddit. And so he has a bunch of different series. And they're fantastic. Like, I read another one of his that he just posted. And I didn't realize it was by the same guy who had written the Lickety Split series. And so, like, as soon as I realized that this is, like, sort of an author that has been on my radar, I, like, started following his main page, because he's a really good writer. So, first of all, I would like to discuss what creepypasta means as a term, just because I know not everyone who watches YouTube might be, like, super familiar with these terms. Like, maybe you're older, maybe you're not, like, super invested in short-form horror. And so, yeah. So, creepypasta, I believe, gets its name from a sort of wordplay from copypasta, which is usually just a very odd or strange text or comment that people post in various situations as sort of a meme. And copypasta is its own culture, which I enjoy myself. If you guys aren't familiar with the term, you may have heard the phrase, "Is marriage the rusted gilded cage or the bang bus of..." I don't remember the exact line. Maybe I'll put a quote. Maybe I'll put it in the comments. Who the fuck knows? I don't care. Basically, creepypasta, as a genre, it's essentially short-form horror stories that are disseminated over the internet. Very specifically, that mode of dissemination that forms short form and the genre horror. And so, creepypastas are fairly common in internet culture. We've all heard of Ben Drowned, we've all heard of Slender Man, we've heard of Jeff the Killer. Those are all very large intellectual ideas that have definitely become part of mainstream culture in the past. Slender Man explicitly has been very, very popular. And then I feel Ben Drowned is a bit more niche, but definitely familiar if you're part of the internet. So that is really what creepypastas are. They're short-form horror stories, usually told through first-person narratives. Though there is a distinct niche subgenre of creepypastas that are told in second person. Think of the Holder series, or SCP, or actually a lot of procedural creepypastas like The Midnight Man. All of those would be a second-person perspective now that I'm thinking of it. But now that we've had a short discussion of the genre as a whole and just various aspects, what is Lickety Split about? Basically, Lickety Split is the story of this England tiny little, hamlet called Itch, which I do love weird-sounding village names. That gets my motor running. And essentially, in this town, there is this creepy little, nursery rhyme called Lickety Split. And the verses, they constantly change from generation to generation. And so, essentially, this guy comes back to town after, a long time. He's a prodigal son or whatever. Oh, and also he had, mental breakdown at some point in the past, which they don't elaborate on, but creepypasta, there's a lot. Creepypasta definitely follows the implied horror aspects of horror, which I enjoy as a horror reader anyway, so moving on. And essentially, he meets up with a friend who has discovered that essentially the verses change over time without anyone deliberately doing it, almost as a form of collective unconscious. At the same time, it also appears that some of the verses predict the mysterious deaths of some of the townsfolk. And so it's just a really, really great creepypasta series. There's 4 short stories that all tie into each other. And so basically imagine a actual short story that you could publish in a novel, but separated between 4 different, installations. So it's serialized, and I feel like there's actually quite a few great serialized fiction out there. For instance, Alexander Dumas and Charles Dickens, if I remember correctly, actually wrote several novels in a serialized format before they were traditionally published. So Man in the Iron Mask, that's one of them. Anyway, getting back to the topic at hand, some stuff I just really love about it is its mix of both verse and prose, which children's rhymes can be exceedingly creepy in horror, and so I really loved just both a common trope but a fresh take upon it, and just the progression and sort of psychological torment that the characters deal with throughout the story. There's a lot of just sort of macabre stuff that happens that isn't explicitly told, but by the end of the story, you have enough background and context to put all the creepiness into context. There we go. So I really liked it. I definitely suggest you recommend, the story to you if you want to check it out. And I'll try to put a link down below to, the actual link to the Reddit to read it. I'm a big fan of creepypastas. I'm a big fan of a lot of short-form horror. So if you have any suggestions for that in the future, I would totally love to hear what you guys think. It would be great. I love you for it, so thanks, Familia, for all that. And, yeah. I don't really got much to say anymore. Also, my camera roll is getting super, super full, so I'm going to, have to do some massive amount of, uploading and deleting today. So I'm going to try to keep this as short as possible. But basically, fam, just thanks for watching. Comment, subscribe, whatever, all that bullshit. And, excuse me, this False Bulls 123, signing out.